What's up, guys? So it's been, I guess, a couple months since I posted any Turbo IS300 content to the YouTube channel here. So I figured it was about time to do another update video just to get you guys back up to speed in terms of what's been going on with the build over the course of the last couple months. I have actually been working on the car quite a bit over that time period, despite obviously not posting videos and stuff here on YouTube. I just haven't really been that motivated to get the camera out to try and film and narrate and edit and all that kind of stuff that's associated with making YouTube videos, because it really adds to the time involved in just trying to get the work done on the car. Sometimes I only have small periods of time where I can break away to work on the car, and so I'm trying to use that time kind of as efficiently as possible to try and get the car back together, back on the ground, back on the dyno, and ultimately back on the road where I can actually enjoy it again, because it's been several months since I've been able to drive the car and I'm starting to get a little bit antsy about it. So if you follow my Instagram account, you've probably been at least a little more informed in terms of what I've been working on with the car, just because it's obviously easier for me to throw just a quick picture or video up on Instagram than it is to film and edit an entire YouTube video. So if you like the Turbo IS, be sure to check out my Instagram, because it's at least a little more active there and has some good content for sure. So anyway, I have basically this giant list of stuff we need to talk about, so let's get started. I guess the first thing we'll talk about here is the turbo itself. So if you saw the last video, you know this is one of the new BorgWarner EFR 9280s, and I talked a little bit about sending the compressor housing off to OCD Works so that they could perform their T51R modification on it. So I ended up doing that, and once I got the compressor housing back, I sent it and the turbine housing off to a company up in Canada called Ion Coating to be powder coated. So I had basically just found Ion Coating on Instagram, saw some of their work and thought it was really good, so I figured I'd give them a shot. And they did an absolutely phenomenal job with my housings. So they have a lot of experience with coating intricate components like turbo housings, and it definitely shows. They were able to match this candy red very closely with this other candy red stuff I have in the engine bay that was coated by a different company several years ago. So very nice on the match job, and all of the masking lines and everything was really sharp and much better than I've ever seen from any other powder coating shop I've used over the years. So these guys definitely know what they're doing, and they're on another level in terms of their attention to detail. So you can see they even did some black lettering for me on the BorgWarner logo there, and I think that turned out awesome. It really helps the logo kind of pop and helps it go along with the rest of the engine bay. So obviously there is some additional cost and time involved in sending your housings clear up to Canada, but in my experience it was well worth it, and I couldn't be happier with the results. So the next thing we'll talk about here is the exhaust manifold. Obviously it's a little difficult to see with the turbo and exhaust system installed, but I have some cell phone pictures that I will try to overlay as I explain what was done to it. Basically, when I had the turbo off and the exhaust system was all off the car, I noticed that the wrap on the exhaust manifold was looking pretty bad. It was really worn, loose, faded, and brittle, and just needed to be removed and replaced. So I decided to pull the exhaust manifold off of the cylinder head in preparation of just rewrapping it with some new exhaust wrap. And once I got the exhaust manifold off of the head, I noticed that the exhaust ports on the cylinder head side were incredibly mismatched and basically looked like they had been a pretty bad restriction in terms of getting the exhaust out of the cylinder head. So I'm honestly shocked that I didn't notice it before, because it's not something that has, changed over the years. It would have been like that when I very first got the manifold. I just simply haven't noticed it, even though I've had the exhaust manifold off the car probably 3 or 4 times over the past 6 years or so. So once I saw how badly, the port matching was on the exhaust manifold, I knew something had to be done about it. So luckily I have a local buddy here who has some nice carbide porting bits and stuff. So I took the exhaust manifold over to him, and he was able to open up the ports to better match the factory gasket. So the exhaust manifold itself should flow a lot better without having the exhaust gases hitting a brick wall. But after he ported it and I got the flanges trued up and sanded down and cleaned up, I rewrapped the whole manifold and basically just reinstalled it with some new gaskets and some new nuts on the cylinder head flange. So that's basically it as far as the exhaust manifold goes. So the next thing we'll talk about here is the exhaust system. I actually ended up building an entirely new 3.5-inch stainless turbo back system for the car. And this is coming from, this is my old 3-inch system that I built a little over 6 years ago actually. And it has been, rock solid. I've had no issues with this old system. But obviously when I built it over 6 years ago, I wasn't really anticipating the car would make over 700 wheel horsepower. So I don't know if or at what point this older 3-inch system would become a restriction as far as airflow and making horsepower. But just for the peace of mind, I decided to build something new that's actually a lot nicer. This old system, I was kind of in a rush when I built it, and I just MIG welded everything. A lot of it's been patched together. This bellow I added at a later time. You can't see it under the wrap, but the wastegate recirculation has been patched because the wastegate used to be dumping back into the downpipe here. So it's definitely served its purpose and got the job done for the past 6 years, but I felt like it was time to upgrade to something that I'm confident won't be a restriction moving forward. So I'm just going to start here kind of at the front of the exhaust system and work my way back to explain some of the changes and the benefits of this new exhaust system versus my old one. You can see I already have the 3.5-inch downpipe all wrapped in some black exhaust wrap, and that's mainly just to keep as much radiant heat off of the surrounding wiring and coolant hoses as much as possible. So I really don't want to go melting like this main body harness or anything like that. That would be some serious headache. The only other thing that really changed, at least from the top side of the exhaust system here, is I moved the wideband oxygen sensor a little further downstream in the downpipe, mainly just to kind of clean up this area of the exhaust system and the engine bay. I wasn't a huge fan of the big O2 sensor poking out of the pipe right where you could see it. So it was pretty easy just to move it a little further down to kind of hide it, tuck it away, and make it a lot less noticeable. So the only downside to that, I guess, is it's a little more difficult to access down there, but it's not something that I need access to often enough for me to really consider it to be much of a downside at this point. So let's move underneath the car and we'll keep working our way back. All right, so we're here underneath the car with pretty terrible lighting, and I apologize for that, but you can see looking up at the downpipe from underneath the car, there's a 3.5-inch flex bellow, and then shortly after that is the 3.5-inch V-band connection. So this new 3.5-inch exhaust system utilizes V-band connections throughout, which really helps with getting it installed and making sure everything lines up perfectly every time. So the whole system is tucked up as tight as possible to the body to help with ground clearance. I really wanted to make sure I wasn't going to have any issues with scraping or rubbing on the street. So I tried to tuck this new exhaust system up as high as possible, and was able to do a pretty good job of that, although it was extremely tedious and took a lot of time, obviously. So you can see here on one of the transmission crossmember bolts is where I utilized a exhaust mount. So that kind of supports the front section of the mid-pipe here, and the whole exhaust system is only comprised of 3 pieces total. So the downpipe, the mid-pipe, and then there's the tail section back there that is connected right before the rear end, I guess. So I'm sure it's inevitable that I will scrape the exhaust at some point, but I can at least rest easy knowing that I tried my best to keep it tucked up as high as possible. All right, so just making our way back here towards the rear of the exhaust system. You can see that there's no resonator in this new 3.5-inch system, so that should also help with the flow potential of this new system versus the old system, just by not having that ultra quiet resonator in the mid pipe. You can see just another V-band connection there from the mid pipe to the tail section, and then right behind that is another exhaust mounting solution. So that helps support not only the rear of the mid pipe but the front of the tail section. And then again, really tight fitment up close to the subframe. Tried to get everything tucked up as tight as possible for the tail section and into a 4-inch Vibrant muffler. So Vibrant doesn't make this muffler with a 3.5-inch inlet. So instead I just bought the one with the 4-inch inlet and used a 3.5 to 4-inch reducer right there on the inlet of the muffler. So this tail section I polished up a little bit just with some Scotch-Brite to knock the color off of the TIG welds, and it turned out really good. So I'm super pleased with how the whole exhaust system turned out. And there's the money shot right there. Pretty aggressive fitment in terms of the muffler and tip placement coming out of the rear bumper, just the way I like it. So from this angle, you can get a little better idea of the ground clearance. The lowest point is definitely where the exhaust system has to go around the rear subframe here. But there's really nothing I can do about that, so we'll just have to pray that we don't rub on anything. So one last thing real quick while we're talking about the exhaust system. I just have to give a huge shout out to my buddy Ronnie, who actually let me borrow his nice TIG welder just so that I could mock everything up in the garage and tack everything together on the car. So that really helped with being able to make sure everything fit perfectly and getting it all tacked up before I took it over to be finish welded by a local guy. So thanks again, Mr. Ronnie. Thumbs up. So back here at the front of the car to talk about some of the changes made to the throttle body and piping configuration. Previously I was running the Ross Machine 75mm throttle body, and I recently stepped up to their 90mm option. So luckily the bolt pattern itself was compatible with my existing throttle body flange here on the intake manifold, but I did have to get the center bore of the throttle body flange bored out to accept the larger throttle body. The old center bore was only 75mm, which was obviously the same size as the old throttle body, so that was not going to work. So I had to pull the entire intake manifold off the car and take it over to my buddy Ronnie, who ported out the center bore of the throttle body flange to accept the new 90mm throttle body. That being said, the inside diameter of this plenum here is exactly 3.5 inches. So that actually matches perfectly with the new 90mm throttle body. So everything should flow extremely well as far as getting the air through the throttle body and into the intake manifold. So one of the other major differences of this 90mm throttle body versus my older 75, is the inlet size. So we went from a 3.5-inch inlet to this is now a 4-inch inlet. And so I saw that as kind of a good opportunity to rebuild some of the intercooler piping to hopefully increase the flow potential, of the entire charge air system. So previously, all of the intercooler piping was 2 3/4, and so I rebuilt it to be 3-inch, with the exception of the pipe right off the turbo is still 2 3/4, just because I couldn't get a 3-inch pipe to fit in that space the way I wanted it to. So with most of the piping increased in diameter, that should help things flow a little easier, especially because the inlet and outlet of this intercooler are actually 3-inch, so everything is matched up there like it should be now. So one more thing, I guess, while we're talking about the piping, I built a new intake here for the turbo out of 4.5-inch pipe. It used to be just 4-inch, which is actually the inlet size of the turbo itself, but I figure it can't hurt to step it up to something bigger just to make sure that 73mm compressor wheel has all the air it needs. And on top of that, I am running a larger air filter now. So my old air filter was only about 6 inches in length as far as the filter element, and this is now an 8-inch filter element. So the rest of the dimensions are about the same as my old filter. It's just about 2 inches longer. So that should provide some additional airflow without sacrificing, filtration or anything like that. I don't want to run it without a filter at this point and risk damaging that fancy new 9280 compressor wheel. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up as far as the piping and stuff goes. All right, so last but not least, we're going to talk about the brakes here. You can see I finally got some better brakes installed on the car. This is a Wilwood 4-piston kit up front with a 13-inch, 1 1/4 thick rotor. Certainly nothing too crazy in terms of big brake kits and the options that are available, but this is a huge upgrade compared to the factory brake system and should be able to handle anything that I throw at it for sure. So this was a kit that was actually sold by a company called Arizona Performance. It's made specifically for the IS300 and includes, everything from the caliper brackets to brake lines, rotors, calipers themselves. So pretty straightforward kit that fit pretty well. The only real complaint or thing I wish they would have mentioned was, since the rotor hat is made of aluminum on this kit, it has to be a little bit thicker than the OEM one, and by it being thicker, it was about 3mm thicker, it pushes the wheel out a little bit further. And in doing that, you lose a little bit of thread engagement on the lug nuts themselves. So once I found out that the wheel was not sitting back as far as it usually was, I lost about, I want to say, 2.5 or 3 full threads of engagement on the lug nuts, which I wasn't really too comfortable with. So what I ended up doing was knocking all the factory studs out and putting in some longer aftermarket studs up front. So that probably wasn't completely necessary, but again, it's one of those things that I don't want to gamble with. So some aftermarket wheel studs are well worth the peace of mind, just to make sure that all the lug nuts are getting a proper amount of thread engagement to hold the wheel in place. So I have some pretty good comparison pictures of this kit and the components versus the OEM stuff, and as well as the weight difference. I was pretty surprised to see that this whole Wilwood kit, even though it's significantly larger and more capable, is about 12 pounds lighter per side. So that was about the easiest 12 pounds of weight savings on each side I've ever had. So while I had the brake system all torn apart, I pulled the rear calipers off, gave them a nice fresh coat of paint, and threw on a little Lexus decal just to make them match a little bit better with the Wilwoods up front. So I already have the entire brake system bled, And so it should be good to go. At this point, I just need to get the car on the ground and take it out and see if we can do some four-wheel skids with the new brakes and no ABS. But no, I'm super happy with the way the Wilwood kit turned out, and I am excited to get it back on the road, get them broken in, and see how they do. Anyway, I think that's gonna do it for this one. Sorry, it's just been kind of a lot of me talking. I'm actually like losing my voice at this point because I've been in the garage yelling at the camera for a couple hours. So hopefully the next video is a little more interesting. I should be taking the car out on the street for kind of its maiden voyage with the entirely new setup here. We will have to take it a little bit easy on it because we need to get the car back on the dyno and dialed in for the new turbo and stuff. So we should be able to get it out there and get the brake system kind of broken in and make sure we don't have any issues. And then at that point we will get it back on the dyno and hopefully make some pretty good power. So we'll see how that goes. But as always, appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.